Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. And if you've been following along, this isn't just an episode in the podcast. It's the third episode in a special series of the podcast, all about our cultures and specifically how to change culture 20 minutes or less. And to do that, I can't do that alone. I have to have my special guest, my compadre, and my workplace culture expert to join me. Her name is Jennifer Moss. She is a researcher. She is an author. She is a speaker specializing in, surprise, surprise, transforming workplace culture. But she does that different than a lot of people who are self-described as experts in this area, by using the data. She's written 2 books that have connection to this whole thing. Both of those books are books that I love, in part because they allowed me to get to know her. She's been on my podcast before this series twice for her book, The Burnout Epidemic, in December of 2021, and then last August for her new book, Why Are We Here? Creating a Work Culture Everyone Wants, which was the genesis for this whole escapade, right?
Yeah, I love that you heard me mention it, because I say it a lot. Because we've had lots of conversations how I get so frustrated where it's like, oh, culture, okay, look, come in, we'll build a new policy, or we'll change a value. And it's like, no, culture is so much more easier to operationalize than people think, and we need to be all responsible for it. And so you and I have very similar ideas about how to transform cultures, and I think it's just maybe the reason why people like what we have to say is because everyone feels like they can do it. It's So like,
you
can do this.
So
It's
like
not
the big idea here is culture is a big thing, but we can't make it a big thing, like you're saying, right? It's not about it's culture is how things work around here. And that means if we change the way we work around here, it will change the culture around here a little bit at a time. So our goal is to give you one thing that you can do in 20 minutes or less that will move your culture in the direction, Jennifer, of the subtitle of your book, Creating a Work Culture Everybody Wants. So like you have what I would call an aspirational culture, whether you've defined it exactly or not. But the things that we're sharing with you that you can do in 20 minutes or less are all things that will move you in the direction of that aspirational culture. And today we're going to talk about generational gaps. And you know what? Here's my observation, that anytime I have a bunch of leaders in a room, especially if they all happen to be generally in one generation, it doesn't matter which one it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be as old as me with gray hair, but they're all in. But if most of them are in one generation, it usually is within the first hour and a half that the idea of generations shows up.
Yes.
Usually or often in a less than rosy conversation. Right. So you've said that you think the generational gap is wider than ever. Why do you say that?
Well, data and evidence is showing that it's wider than it ever has been. There was this quote that really struck me from the American Psychology Association, and it said, ageism is the last socially acceptable prejudice. It's like, we can joke about it, but it's really not. It's really harmful. It's really not a good thing for us to do. And one of the things that we hear a lot in these big media headlines, and it's impossible to work with Gen Zs, or one of the headlines was, managers are afraid to work with their Gen Z employees, and then we see on the flip side, boomers can't Google and they micromanage. I mean, and these are headlines. These are ripped from the headlines. There was another one that I thought was people find this so funny, but it's terrible. It was like, the one headline in the BBC was, millennials would be able to afford buying their homes if only they stopped eating avocado toast. And, like,
Wait,
yeah,
so
it's it's funny, but it's not funny, right?
Wh- When you propose this as one of our topics, I have to say, I
Mhm.
have to tell you a couple of things. The first thing is when this comes up in groups that I'm with, one of the things I always say is that for the first time in human history, we have people from 5 generations working together.
Yeah.
Never happened before. Because number one, we're living longer, and a lot of people, at least in the US, their 401ks became 201ks and decided they needed to keep working, right? So for whatever your reasons are there, we got people, we got people further apart in age. And I yes, there's some technology stuff here and there's some of that stuff. I have a real concern when people want to start using the stereotypes, right? Boomers, Gen Z, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Like because for every generation, I can show you someone that looks an awful lot like more like one of the other generations. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to have this conversation. It just means that I think we have to be careful about stereotypes. Agree?
Always. I mean, we should always be checking our bias. And it's been, I think the reason why, I share those headlines is just because it's made it so ubiquitous. It's sort of like, how we talk about each other, and what the APA is saying is that it is the last socially accepted prejudice. I mean, we are allowed to, to make fun of our coworkers in this way because this is just how the narrative has shifted. And when you look at really interesting research that's been done specifically by researchers focused on youngism in particular, and this rise of youngism, they said this is the worst sort of demonstration or the highest increase of youngism that we've seen in any other cohort. So there's just this kind of dislike for young people. We call young people lazy and entitled, and we give them a hard time because they're fighting for things that that they want, which is work life balance, like that well-being. They want to have a life that isn't just so identified with work. They want to have more meaning and purpose in the work that they do. I mean, we've modeled a terrible example of work, really. So many of us have burnt out, extras and boomers just kind of like sticking it out. It's almost like pain is a virtue or pain is heroic, versus really looking at what young people are telling us and saying, actually, maybe this is a better model of work and listening. And so, when we talk about how to actually fix this in 20 minutes or less, I say it's all going to come down to having more explicit communication. We have way too much implied expectations at work based on the history of how maybe older millennials, Xers, boomers were raised like this is how you should do it. And now I'm annoyed that you're not doing it. This is
Can I
what
stop you right there? I mean,
yes.
before you go on. So yes, underlining this for all of you, and we need to have more explicit communication around expectations, and not just about generations and age,
Yeah.
right? Like all of that, yes, and just in general, like this is a foundational leadership responsibility that we're not collectively doing very well.
No, it's another reason why I hate the term. And this is why a lot of it, communication, it all comes down to the language we use inside of organizations. Like I hate the term above and beyond. What does above and beyond mean? It's so specific to every individual, and it's so exclusive. I mean, some person, if there's an expectation, implied expectation that above and beyond means going out to the bar after work, you have that single mom that has to go home to her kids, sole income earner, like she doesn't have the ability to go above and beyond if that is what the expectation is, the implied expectation. So when we're thinking across generations, it's about being very specific. For a young person, instead of at onboarding, we, give them their tools, their laptop or whatever it is that they're bringing into work, setting up their desk, telling them who the people are that, and sharing the org chart, all that stuff that we think of onboarding. Onboarding should be talking about what each individual leader that they're reporting to, how they like to communicate. Are they a person that it is okay to be peer to peer? They don't care as much about deference, as some other one, leader would prefer. How do you, get to where you want to be? What is a plan for you? You have a 5-year plan and you have a 1-year plan. Let's talk about what that would look like. What does above and beyond for you specifically and explicitly look like? So, I mean, this is just, giving some homework to this person that's joining any organization and having them come up with an idea of what they think that they want from their career. And then you, as a leader, coming in and being explicit about what that looks like. But give them the gray area data, share how it is that the nuances of the people that they're working with and what the expectations are. We can't just expect them to come in and not think that they have just as a valuable as idea as the CEO, because we raised them to have an opinion. By the time that they were toddlers, we were asking them, do you like this toy? If you don't like this toy, here's another toy. This is how we raise them, to have opinions, to push back on status quo, to feel like there was that peer-to-peer relationship with adults. And so that's how they're coming into work. So we need to do a better job of creating much better, clearer pathways and tell them what it exactly looks like, and then give them
And why?
markers and
And why?
why. And yeah, but they're coming up with the why because it's their hopes, their dreams, their future that they're bringing to you and saying, this is what I want to get out of this job. And then you can give them like, this is how you're going to achieve that. This might be tricky. Our policies are the way that we work in these relationships. You have to find this different pathway to get to those goals. Just have an open conversation right away and show the pathway. I feel like everyone onboarding should have that same conversation, whether you're a young, Gen Z coming in or if you're coming in as a mature worker. But just better, more explicit communication allows you then to also, share what you're good at. We have this bias that every young person coming in knows everything about AI and mature workers know nothing about it. It's a really big problem. And when you looked at the data of mature workers exiting, 40% of them in this pretty large scale study, 40% of them said they would have stayed if they had continuing education in AI and new technology. So we're losing these mature workers that have a desire to learn. So again, just asking, planning, being specific, creating shared goals, and then also mapping them more consistently so that everyone knows what's going on.
Two things from what you've said. Number one, on the last point, my wife and I, Lori and I, had a conversation last night. She's a pharmacist, worked in retail for many years, and now she works for she works with mail order stuff, and so she has all this work that she does. They've added some new stuff, some new systems, and her comment to me last night was, some of this learning this new stuff is hard, and I know it's good for me, and so it's frustrating sometimes, and it's good for me. And so even though part of her would say, could we just keep it the same? Another part of her says, no, this is exactly what I still need. And so, and that is sort of like the work itself, as opposed to this other more developmental stuff, right? We got to remember that even if people are going to retire at whatever age, they're not dying the next day. And so a lot of those new skills still are valuable to them beyond that. But I want to go back to something you said earlier when we were talking about explicit expectations, specifically around communication, because there's no doubt that the way people my age might want to communicate might be different than people my daughter's age, right? 27, right? And so if I think we ought to be sent an email and the person working for me, and this doesn't have to be related to age, but often is, but their preference would be to send a text, then, or a Slack message or Teams message, then we need to be clear about what our preferences are. But preferences are different than the work. So like, I'll give you an example. I've used this example for years. My son is 33, but from when he first got a phone, here's what I've never understood, Jennifer, ever. And I've said this
Yeah.
in public before, probably not on the internet before, but here we go. So like when Parker first got a phone, I was never could understand how if I called him, he didn't answer, but if I texted him, he called me right away.
Yes.
It's still true.
Yeah.
Now, so I have two choices. I can either say, what the heck, or I can just text him if I want him to talk to me. I can make that choice. Now, if he worked for me as a salesperson and he said, well, I'm only going to text because that's my preference, I might say, from a business perspective, no. Like there's a difference between preference and business need. And we need to have the conversation about both. About both.
I love this because this is where we come together. This is where the gap closes, is understanding that this is a cohort that's going to become 30% of our workforce very soon. And they're so frustrated. They're opting out. They're finding that they don't have the same golden handcuffs that we would have, like as Xers and boomers, you bought a house, you want to have a car. They're opting out of a lot of those types of things that are incentives, those compensation incentives. And so we need different ways of attracting and retaining young talent, and because they're opting out. And as much as we're talking about AI taking over jobs, I really see that as, you know, everything's cyclical. We're going to see the capacity of AI, and then we're going to realize actually we need a lot of humans to do a lot of work. And so, this idea, I think it's very short-sighted to think that we could just ignore an entire generation of talent. I mean, we still have to attract and retain them. And there's this term that like no one, I don't love this buzzword, but it is radical acceptance. There's a different way that they communicate, and we can be explicit and say, this leader really works best on email. If you want to get access to them and if you want to have a better relationship with them, email. Like, trust me, this is better. But you can also say, I am more fluid. Like, if you are comfortable texting, I can totally text. Like, this is a kind of conversation we need to have, and let, yeah, you let people know that this is where there's a bit more fluidity. This is where it's going to be easier. And then maybe this is going to put a barrier for you. And if you want to get to this point in your career, you might have to adjust your communication style. But there's still a lot of people, this person, this person, this person, they don't mind if you text them. Like, that is what we need. It seems like, kind of arbitrary, or we should just know this, or we should just learn this. But why not just make it easier on ourselves as leaders, and then make it easier for those that are joining our organization so that they have a more seamless experience? I mean, it just feels like it makes sense, but for some reason we're very stuck. Xers in my group and boomers that I talk to, they just feel very slighted or frustrated, that they just don't understand, or this is what I had to do, so these young people need to buck up and do it too. But they're just not going to. So let's have a more dynamic, nuanced conversation. And then I think we'll all just get along much better.
So before we close this, here's my observation. I'll let you comment on that, and then we'll wrap up today. So many of the things that we've talked about today start with mindset. I mean, you've given us some very tangible things. We've talked about some very tangible things that you can, as a leader, do differently to close the generational gap. And we both hope that you all will do that. But it all starts with a mental shift first. Agree?
Just check your bias, like if there are jokes about these things and that it's a certain group that's all running these jokes, just kind of say, hey, what can we learn instead? TikTok and all of these trends on TikTok, like quiet firing, quit talk, and all these things that we think are ridiculous. We're not there. We're not paying attention to the most incredible amount of data that we can get about connecting in with this younger cohort. So just realize that the more that we push away, the less we can learn and the less effective we are as leaders.
So every week, not only on this series, but on my podcast for 500 plus episodes, I always close with this question. Now what? What are you going to do now? You got plenty today to take action on. And all I would say is pick something. Right? You can do everything we talked about. Awesome. But you'll be likely overwhelmed, even though it was a relatively discrete amount of stuff. Pick something, go do that one thing. If you do that one thing, it will start to make a difference. You will start to change your culture in less than 20 minutes. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss episodes in the future, and come back next week for our 4th episode in this series. And I hope you'll do that. And I hope you'll make sure, whatever you do, that you're subscribed and you're telling others to join us, and come back next week for another episode. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.